What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we are getting into, or I guess really completing the second half of Ultimates. This is when things get a little bit hairy. Well, not really hairy, but this is when things get a little bit interesting. And the reason why is because, again, we're covering this as part of Hickman's run going into like Avengers and New Avengers to kind of set the stage for a lot of that stuff. And we'll actually double back to some Ultimate Universe stuff once we get further into this. But where this story ends, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, where the story ends as far as Hickman is concerned is around issue number 8 or so. And then that's when Sam Humphries begins to pick up with his run on Ultimates. So we'll talk more about what that means with regards to the actual story itself. But again, in the last video, what we had was basically the rise of the city and the children of tomorrow, which is to say individuals who were had their evolution essentially sped up inside this dome that was constructed by Reed Richards. Of course, Ultimate Reed Richards essentially became a bad guy a little bit before this story picked up, but this is when he really becomes the Maker, which is kind of like a full-on villain. Now, the idea behind this is that what we end up doing, at least initially end up doing, is picking up with a place called Tian, which is, well, really, I guess it's called Tian. In All New, All Different Marvel, it's called New Tian, but basically this is the Ultimate Universe version of what amounts to basically Avalon. And what I mean by this is that in the main Marvel Universe, Magneto, really during Chris Claremont's run, had tried on several occasions to create a sort of paradise for mutant kind, which is to say a place where mutants could take up residence and reside outside the influence of humanity. The most notable of which was Asteroid M, or Avalon, depending on what you want to call it, which existed out in space. But that's basically what New Tian is, or I'm sorry, what Tian is. And this comes out of something called Seer. Now, in Seer, in the Ultimate Universe, you had what was called the Southeast Asian Republic. And the idea behind this was that when Nick Fury was the original super soldier, and Nick Fury had basically vanished, and then Steve Rogers became the new super soldier, and then he was assumed to have been killed during the events of World War II, what this did is it gave rise to a lot of individuals or a lot of different countries trying to create their own super soldiers. Seer was one of these organizations that was kind of late to the game. And it really wasn't until like after Ultimatum that Seer started trying to mass manufacture individuals with superpowers. And so what they did is they took a huge percentage of their population and literally started like injecting them with superpowers seemingly at random, just see what kind of powers manifested. And this led into a group called the People, which is basically kind of like this coalition of individuals who all had powers. What you ended up getting was essentially a rebellion among the Southeast Asian Republic, where those with superpowers essentially annihilated the Seer government, and then in turn Tian rose up. And this is basically led by Zorn and Zorn. So you have XORN and ZORN, and they're essentially brothers. Now, this is the Ultimate Universe version of them, meaning that you have one version of Zorn who has like vast telekinetic powers. Then you have the other version of Zorn who has like a black hole inside his helmet, meaning if he takes his head off, it'll unleash a singularity on Earth. And we'll actually see that play out here in a little while. But the other half of this is you have Tian really responding to this, and you have like S.H.I.E.L.D. showing up to Tian, basically saying, hey, look, like the children of tomorrow are going to come for you. And so we're looking for your aid here, like we're looking for your help at the very least to warn you, and two, so we can use your powers to kind of go to war against the children of tomorrow because you're the most powerful force in existence at the moment right now. The issue with this is that most of really a lot of the people on Tian are kind of isolationists, which is to say you stay away, we stay away. And so we don't really want to get involved in this. We don't really want to have anything to do with this. And so while all that's going on in the city proper, what you end up having is the Incredible Hulk who shows up and just starts ripping everything to pieces. Now, at this point, we kind of jump back about 17 hours before the current events in the story and pick up with a guy named Marvin Flum. Now, Marvin Flum was introduced as part of Hickman's run. He's new to this story. And the idea is that we'll go ahead and kind of continue through this so you guys will understand what's going on, because a lot of the stuff that's being done to explain his character actually happens over the course of this story. But essentially, he met with Bruce Banner. Now, here's the important thing to bear in mind. Ultimate Universe Hulk is similar, but also very different to the main Marvel Universe Hulk. Namely, like, he eats people. But the idea is that after Ultimatum, during the events of like Ultimate Fallout, when Peter Parker died and all that kind of stuff, the death of Spider-Man hit the superhero community in a lot of different ways. And what this did is it allowed for Marvel to kind of rework the Incredible Hulk and have him basically just kind of go off, live with monks, and try to live some measure of a peaceful life. What happens is Marvin Flum shows up and says, you have to go destroy the city. And when the response to the Incredible Hulk is no, then Marvin Flum says, yeah, but like if you don't, then like we're gonna kill Betty Ross. It's basically blackmail. Now because of the fact that the Incredible Hulk is really lives up to his namesake in the sense that he's very similar to his main Marvel Universe counterpart, and with regards to the fact that he's very unpredictable and you never really know what he's gonna do. He's got insane levels of strength. He is powerful enough to go through and start wreaking havoc in the city. And so when the city starts to respawn, of Of course, you have like all these things kind of going nuts. The members of the city respond, and of course they try to take out the Incredible Hulk as best they can, but they don't really stand much of a chance because it's just raw strength. And so in response to this, it's one of these kind of brain meets brawn sort of situations when the Maker tells everyone to stand down, and he in turn goes to respond and deal with the Incredible Hulk. And again, that's when things really begin to pop off, when things really begin to go nuts. Because when you had Tian and you had their essential telepath go through and try to like communicate with the city and try to tell everybody in the world what was going on, Reed Richards had hijacked the telepathic signal and then used it to communicate directly with Tian proper and basically say like, we're going to take everything away from you, like we're going to conquer you, there's nothing you can do, and then in turn overload the mind of their telepath and kill him. That kind of sets the ground for Tian responding, because what it is this an act of aggression now, where Tian is one of these places where again it's very much isolated, it's very much we do our own thing, do not bother us. We're basically the remnants of Seer and we don't really want to be bothered by people. It's essentially a first strike on behalf of Reed Richards. And so you really have like all these super powerful beings who all just immediately start to go through and basically attack the dome proper. Now, the issue with this is that while all this is going on, you have a meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the reason for this is because all this really kind of comes down to the failure of S.H.I.E.L.D. Remember, S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Ultimate Universe is designed to be as much a peacekeeping organization as it is an organization that's designed to function with action and to actually like engage in conflict. And S.H.I.E.L.D. was designed for the purpose of maintaining peace across the world in place of various governments, or at least to kind of orchestrate and maintain those peace treaties. The problem is that S.H.I.E.L.D. has basically failed and the world's plummeting into chaos because they've been totally unable to stop Reed Richards. And so in response to this, the President of the United States, who's basically Barack Obama at the time this is written, calls a meeting of Congress, of the various, of both the House Representatives and the Senate itself. And what's happening here is he's executed the Winter Protocols. And what the Winter Protocols do is they allow for S.H.I.E.L.D. to target the Ultimates and specifically Nick Fury, for S.H.I.E.L.D. to fall under the control of Marvin Flum and in turn like become an enemy of the superhero community. And so when that happens, like Tony Stark, Thor, all the members of the Ultimates, Nick Fury himself, they're all now public enemy number one, and they're all being tracked down by S.H.I.E.L.D. So think of this as a Ultimate Marvel counterpart to like Order 66 from that disastrous Star Wars prequel trilogy. In the midst of all this, we really kind of switch back to Reed Richards and the Incredible Hulk. Now, this is something I've kind of wanted to talk about for a minute. This is what makes Ultimate Reed Richards so dangerous. Is Ultimate Reed Richards is kind of the answer to the question, what if main Marvel Reed became a bad guy? And what if he was twice as good with his tongue as he is with his brain? And so really, like when he starts talking to the Incredible Hulk, it's basically like, look man, you're being used. Like the government never had any intention of handing Betty Ross back to you. All the federal government knows is how to strike. But that's basically because everybody in the US federal government are just a bunch of dumbasses. And so because they're basically idiots, they don't really know how to deal with someone on an intelligence level of my level, who's as smart as me. And so they're going to do exactly what I predicted they would do, which is launch an attack. And that's exactly what the government does. When the president steps up and starts addressing Congress, what he essentially says is two things. One, I've executed the Winter Protocols, which means now S.H.I.E.L.D. is under the direct authority of the United States government, specifically with Marvin Flum acting on our behalf. And two, I've launched a full-scale strike against Reed Richards. And when the question is asked, what have you done? The response to the president is, I've launched the entire nuclear arsenal of the United States. Every single nuclear weapon we have is targeted towards that city, and we're going to try to destroy it as best we can. But that's the crazy thing about this, is that ultimately none of it works, and it goes exactly the way we thought it would, when you basically have like the city fully prepared for that. That's really what Reed Richards was hitting home at, that the federal government lags behind, that the federal government is afraid that somebody will come along and take its power. The city is so far advanced that in the face of overwhelming odds, the government will do the only thing it knows how to do, which is attack, not think. And so Reed is kind of like, we'll just go with the flow. We can easily withstand the entire nuclear arsenal of the United States, because of what use would a city this advanced be if it couldn't defend itself? And then once we deal with this onslaught, we'll just go from there. What the city did not prepare for was the intervention of Zorn. And that's when things really begin to pop off, because when Zorn pops up, I mean, for the most part, the people are being totally destroyed by the Children of Tomorrow, because the Children of Tomorrow are designed to be adaptable. They're designed to be hyper evolved. And so essentially what they do is adapt to every single attack of the people. They analyze their powers, they realize what their powers are, and then adapt accordingly. And so for the most part, being as advanced as they are, the citizens of Tian don't really stand a chance here. And in the face of defeat, in the face of realizing the odds are hopeless, what Zorn does is remove his mask and expose the singularity, and literally just starts expanding rapidly and consuming everything in his path. Now, this is not an infinite singularity, right? It's not like a traditional black hole where it just constantly expands based on the amount of mass it consumes. It expands to a point and then dissipates. And that's exactly what happens here. When it starts consuming everything around it, it basically destroys a huge portion of the city itself and cracks the dome, which is really the only thing they needed. The problem with this is that Reed Richards was thinking ahead. Reed's idea was, okay, the federal government are full of a bunch of idiots. They're going to attack because it's the only thing they know how to do. We'll move the city into a position to where we'll conquer essentially everything in our path. We'll present ourselves as such an extreme credible threat that the government will do the only thing it knows how to do, and it'll dump its entire arsenal. Their entire arsenal will not be effective, but what that will mean is they have no real retaliation of any kind whatsoever. Inevitably, the president's going to call a meeting because he has to in order to inform the Joint Chiefs or inform Congress of what he's done. And what this is going to do is set the stage for their total annihilation. And so what Reed has done is he basically brings in one of the evolved children, which is essentially a walking, talking like teleporter. And what this guy is he's carrying a weapon of mass destruction. And Reed says, this is your job. This is the role that was assigned to you, is to be a weapon of destruction. Reed teleports the kid to Congress in front of the president, the House, and the Senate and detonates the kid. And this kid basically releases what amounts to a thermonuclear explosion, annihilating the entirety of the US federal government. It's extreme. There's no functioning government in the United States anymore. It's gone. Now, what this will do, and this is actually when Sam Humphries begins to take over, this sets in motion the return of Captain America in the Ultimate Universe and the second Civil War in the United States. But this is kind of the transition. What you will usually see is you'll see a transition between writers. Unless a writer just wholly takes over with like a new run, you'll see a transition. In this instance, you have Jonathan Hickman, who was basically Ultimates with Jonathan Hickman, and then you had Jonathan Hickman and Sam Humphries. And so what that meant was Marvel was transitioning from Hickman's run into Humphries' run. And so the two of them kind of collaborate, where Hickman kind of writes out his plot threads, Sam Humphries brings his in, and that's where you start getting into the idea of the Civil War. And so focusing almost exclusively on what's going on with regards to what Hickman's doing, you have S.H.I.E.L.D., which is controlled by Marvin Flum, operating according to his command. It's really a dictatorship. You've got Nick Fury and the Ultimates, who are basically going underground, and then you've got Tony Stark. Now, what Tony Stark has done is essentially created an AI in the form of a child. And this is when Hickman's plot threads get wrapped up quick, fast, and in a hurry. And so what basically ends up going on here is you have Tony Stark, who reveals to Susan Storm that Reed Richards is the one who's doing all this, and he's the one that destroyed Washington, D.C. And then you have the newly appointed president of the United States, who basically steps in and then makes a peace treaty of sorts with Reed Richards by essentially handing over Tony Stark. Now, the handing over of Tony Stark was done intentionally, which is to say, there's a reason why it's Tony and nobody else. When it came to Reed Richards in the Ultimate Universe, kind of transitioning to him becoming a bad guy, the idea behind this was that he was one of those who was instrumental in essentially sending Reed Richards out to the negative zone, kind of locking him away when he first became a bad guy. And so what this has done is created a lot of animosity between the two. But the idea behind Reed is to essentially break down Tony Stark. For all the evolution that the Children of Tomorrow have, they're not Tony. Tony Stark is an absolute genius. Duplicating his intelligence is not easily done. And so the intention of Reed is to literally like dissect Tony, figure out what it is that makes him so smart, and then duplicate it. Now, this is very, very important. And the reason why is because if Reed were able to take the intelligence of Tony Stark and then bring it inside his own brain, it would push him to a higher level of intelligence, which in turn would allow him to introduce new concepts and new ideas to the city itself, and then in turn hyper evolve it even further. Because remember, the motivations and the machinations of Reed are not limited to Earth. It's expanding outside Earth into the universe itself and literally like conquering the entire universe. And so when all this goes on with Tony Stark, you essentially have this small child AI that he's created, which begins communicating directly with the city itself. And so when that happens, when this child AI starts talking to the city and simply saying like, we're friends, we can help each other, this is kind of interesting, because one of the things to bear in mind here is that for all the intelligence that goes on with the various individuals inside the city and the AI itself, they are essentially cut off from the world. There's a lot of experiences they've never had. And that's really the Achilles heel of the city itself, of the people in it and the AI that runs it, that there's no real exposure there. All it knows is Reed and whatever Reed tells it. And so when this kid shows up and says, hey, like we can be friends and we should work together and so on and so forth, the city goes along with it because it doesn't really know how to interact or anything like that. Now, what the city does in turn is begin developing weapons to work against Reed Richards and literally start manifesting various giant Iron Man suits to attack Reed. And when Reed tries to seize control, the city's response is, no, you're unfit to be the leader. And this is a very important thing. The reason why the city comes to this conclusion is because what the AI has been doing is communicating directly with it and telling it, here are all the problems that Reed has, and here's how he works directly against the city itself. The basis behind the city was to evolve humanity to a higher level of existence and then spread to the stars, to eliminate things like jealousy and envy and base human emotions that would basically work against its ability to evolve on its own behalf and become better. Reed Richards is governed by revenge, which Reed should not have based on the rules he's created inside the city itself and those who live in it. And so what the AI has essentially done is look at Reed and say, you work directly against the city, because all these emotions and these attitudes you're displaying run directly in contradiction to, one, the rules that we follow, and two, the betterment of the city itself. And so in turn, it turns against Reed. Now again, like when you have the Incredible Hulk kind of going through and going crazy and attacking everything and kind of losing its mind, what we end up finding out is this was the entire motivation behind Tony Stark. That Tony Stark had gone to the president of the United States and said, Reed hates me, so hand me over to Reed. Like literally go to Reed Richards and say, here's Tony Stark, this is a peace offering, a way to find a truce between the two of us. Reed won't ask questions because no matter what he says or what he does or as intelligent as he is, he's still human, he's still emotional, and he still hates me. So he's just going to go with the flow and just accept this and not really ask any questions. And so again, it really kind of comes out of left field. And so in this moment, you have Susan Storm who shows up, again, really kind of showing how much she hates Reed by, really grabbing him in his weakened state and then putting him into a force field and basically balling him up into a tiny little ball so he can be imprisoned by S.H.I.E.L.D. proper. So again, it really wraps up fast. It wraps up quick, fast, and in a hurry. There's not a whole lot to go on here, but it's pretty basic in terms of the fact that it sets the stage for the relationship between Nick Fury once he retakes control of S.H.I.E.L.D. and then Reed Richards himself during the events of like Avengers and New Avengers, when you see him working alongside S.H.I.E.L.D. and then you see him meeting like the Cabal, which is Name of the Submariner, Corvus Glaive, Proxima Midnight, Thanos, basically the remnants of the Black Order alongside Namor himself. But again, setting the stage, this is just kind of bringing this little bit of information in and allowing you guys to know what's going on once we get into the actual events involving Avengers and New Avengers and how it is the Ultimate Universe fits into it. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.